So Richard created this whole big paranoid scenario. But I realized as he was doing it, he was doing these patterns, right? If somebody went to something in the present, he would change the time frame. If somebody went to something here, he would go to another level. And I suddenly realized that has a structure.
Yeah.
And I could do it. This is the whole idea of modeling. I suddenly realized, okay, I could do what he was doing now. I could make these, what we call these kinds of verbal reframes. And so that was what really got me thinking, okay, this has a structure. And I started putting down that structure. So it was actually this moment when Richard was spontaneously doing it.
And that's when you...
That was the moment that this clicked.
The Connect Coaching, Unplugged.
Good morning, good afternoon, good day,
Hello, everyone.
From wherever you are in the world. This is podcast number 33 with Connect Coaching, Conor, Healy, Kallum, Hock, and NLP pioneer developer, living legend, Robert Dilts. Welcome to the podcast. Kallum is going to share with the world a little bit about you.
Okay. Thanks for being here, Robert. We're huge fans. Robert Dilts is a globally renowned leader in Neuro-Linguistic Programming and one of its most influential contributors since the field's inception in the 1970s. He's best known for developing transformative models such as Sleight of mouth and a set of conversational reframing techniques for shifting beliefs and logical levels, a framework for understanding and facilitating personal and organizational change. These groundbreaking tools have become cornerstones of the NLP practice, empowering individuals and organizations to achieve profound transformations. And he's also the acclaimed author of 32 books. Robert has shared his expertise in areas such as leadership, creativity and belief change, and generative coaching. He has worked with top organizations, including Apple and IBM, and co-founded the International Association of Generative Change, focusing on fostering innovation and personal growth. Through his teachings, writings, and consulting, Robert continues to inspire and empower people worldwide to break through their challenges, unlock their potential, and create meaningful, lasting change. Robert, thank you so much for being here.
Well, yeah, that sounds like a great resume. Thank you.
You deserve it.
Yeah.
Wow. We are so happy to have you here, sharing about yourself to our audience. And what we always love to do is first begin with where it began for yourself. You mentioned just offline that we're moving into 50 years of NLP.
Yes.
Where did your journey start with the 50 years?
Right. Yeah. So, it started at the University of California at Santa Cruz, here in Santa Cruz. I was a student. I believe I was a junior at that time. So actually had a kind of an interesting path. I actually started off as an art major for my first year, and then I switched to being a physics major, which was kind of, didn't know it at the time, but sort of shifting from one hemisphere to the other.
It
sort
is.
of thing. And then my third year, I thought, okay, I want to study politics. So I was studying politics, and I thought at the time would be good to know something about language. Also, my older brother, Michael, was studying linguistics at Harvard University and was encouraging me to sort of check it out. So in September 1975, I walked into this beginning linguistics class at the University of California at Santa Cruz. John Grinder happened to be the professor. He was professor of linguistics, and he and Bandler had just finished writing The Structure of Magic Volume 1.
Okay.
And I remember, I think it was like the second day of class, John essentially taught us all, I think it was 200 people in this class, because it was a base, beginning class, a big, lecture class. He taught us all the basic distinctions of the meta model.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, this is the first useful thing I've ever learned in school. So we were going out, and asking all these meta model questions. And fortunately, I had sort of a natural capacity for rapport. Because I remember, this was like a Tuesday, Thursday class. And by the time the next class came around, about half of the students in the class came in kind of forlorn, down because they had alienated all of their friends. their professors, going, love me, how specifically? Can you put that in the wheel?
Yeah,
They were these
There were
meta monsters.
Yeah,
Meta monsters.
So anyway, that kind of really grabbed me, and I thought, wow, this is exactly something that could be used in politics. And I remember sort of one of the first things that I did was I used the meta model, the questions, to look at Plato's dialogues, so Plato's Republic, and was showing how Socrates of course, Plato, but Plato's Socrates was using these meta model patterns in his Socratic method, that a lot of the Socratic method is utilizing these patterns. And that caught John Grinder's attention. And, he gave me an assignment to do the same thing with Gregory Bateson's metalogs. So Gregory Bateson, who was also a professor there, became very interested in what Bandler and Grinder were doing. And but he had these things called a metalog that he would have with his daughter, Mary Catherine. And so John wanted me to sort of analyze that. And that got me involved in going to these early groups that he and Bandler were doing before NLP had its name. And then
I heard, was it called Meta before NLP? Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. There was because then that's why there was meta publications, so the whole idea of meta was very important. This idea of, a meta model means you're making a model of other models. And, the thing that really first grabbed me, that I thought was so deeply, profound about the structure of magic is that, Bandler and Grinder, in that book, they were saying, look, we've been looking at these different therapies and therapists, and they said one of the interesting, I don't know, you could call it paradoxes, if you will, of therapy is that all therapies work for some people, So they said, rather than try to look at the therapy, what happens in the person when it works?
Right.
And I thought that's brilliant, So what does it happen inside whoever it is when it works? And they said, what happens, of course, is that somehow people suddenly have a wider, richer map of the world. They suddenly have more choices. So let's focus on that rather than who has the right method. Any method that can bring out, this notion of more, richer internal model of the world. That's what it's about, and that's what NLP developed for. So.
Impressive. I heard there was a cohort called the Meta Team. Were you part of Meta Team?
Yes, I was. The Meta Team had started before I got involved, and I was saying those were these groups. They were Bandler and Grinder were holding these meta groups, and Frank Pucelik was a major part of that, and then some of my other colleagues, David Gordon, Stephen Gilligan, people like that, were also part of these meta groups. And we would go up and they would have us, they would be some theme, and they would do a demo, and then we would go out and work with each other. And we used to call it the Academy of Space, because we were space cadets. But we're out there, exploring whatever we could, especially after I think it was about halfway through my first class with Grinder that Bateson, who was, again, impressed with their work, but it was also a colleague of Milton Erickson. He sent Bandler and Grinder down to see if they could make any sense out of Erickson when they came back. And I remember when John Grinder first came back, he said, well, everything is wrong. In other words, the meta model, we're going to flip the meta model to the other side. The Milton model is,
I love those two models.
The opposite of the meta model, because one is trying to get more specific, and
correct.
The other is going the other direction. So that was this kind of great,
bifurcation.
And so they would, what their way of modeling was not, the kind of observation and analysis. It was, you go down, you see what somebody does, and once you can do the same thing, then you say, well, what's the pattern? So they would go down to see Erickson, come back up and do to us all these things that it's like an Erickson do.
That would have been such a brain fry, because if you try and do Milton model and then meta model or meta model and then Milton model, it actually hurts. It hurts up here.
Well, that's when, we began to realize, okay, there's a lot more going on. And I think that's where neuro-linguistic programming came out of that, because if you're just focusing on the language aspect, it's one thing. But when they started looking behind the language, so what is either one of them doing? It's actually, it's either way, what you're trying to do is get this wider, richer map of the world, whether it's the Milton model or the meta model. Even though they seem opposites in a certain way, their goal is the same thing. If I can enrich the map of the world. So now it's just different modalities to do that.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot to digest there. I think one of the things that really fascinates me is, what was it like in those early years before NLP was NLP, when it was the meta team and the space cadets?
Yeah.
What was the feeling like? Did you guys understand and quantify like the sheer vastness and the gravity of what you guys were discovering and creating and developing? Was there a sense of you being on a new frontier and at the cusp of something really special?
I mean, that's a great question. And I've thought about that a lot. I mean, certainly at the time, for me, I was going, wow, this is incredible. This is what Aristotle should have come up with or something. This is not fundamental. But you also have to realize at that time in the, sort of early mid 70s, this is the same, Apple was starting, just, 30 minutes away.
Right.
And
a lot of innovation in that age.
But you had Bandler and Grinder starting NLP, and you had Jobs and Wozniak starting Apple. In fact, by the way, Bandler and Grinder were some of the first dealers of Apple back in those days. In the early days of Apple, if you bought more than 5 Apple computers, you were automatically a dealer, right? So you got a discount, you're a dealer. I got my first Apple, a very low serial number Apple, which is probably worth something now. Bought it from John Grinder.
Is that right?
Yeah, and then 1970s. But I would bring that up because in those days and in this area, there was just this belief that anything was possible, and that we were, you're changing the world, and again, you have these two young guys, Jobs and Wozniak. You would think, okay, they say they're changing the world. Well, they did, right? Bandler and Grinder, we thought, okay, we're going to change the world, and in some ways we did. Not as there's still plenty of problems in the world today as if you look around, but I think that the NLP is spread all over the planet.
Absolutely.
It's used in so many different ways. It's helped, millions and millions of people.
Yeah.
So, and it was interesting. I mean, it's interesting you asked that, Kallum, because that was certainly my feeling. And of course, you don't really know, but it's just like, wow, I feel like this is going to be something that's going to change the world. And so there was definitely, at least for some of us, certainly for me, there was that feeling. And again, it was something that I think was also part of the ethos of that time, maybe, just that of this area of the sort of Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area.
Yeah. So meta to NLP is a lateral chunk there. What's the gap in the middle?
Well, I think, there was meta was primarily about the language. It was primarily verbally oriented, and so they began. So a little bit of the history. John had an interesting background. He was, I think his education was actually in psychology from the University of San Francisco, which is a Catholic school. But then he graduated in the early 1960s, which was sort of the Kennedy era. And in that era, what you did if you were, and John, by the way, John, was extremely physically fit. I think he was even potentially, he may have been a ranked tennis player at some point. I mean, John was
I heard he was, I don't know, you hear things,
Yeah.
but high up it's a level in the military as well. Did he have a military
Oh, well,
background?
I mean, he went into the military. And in those days, again, if you were in the military and you were kind of the cream of the crop, you went into the special forces.
Mm.
So John was what was known then as Green Beret, which would be the equivalent today of sort of the Navy SEALs. You know, they were the
right.
elite ones. According to him, you know, he did 50 missions into the then, Eastern Europe, parachuting in and getting defectors across the border.
Wow.
Which is where he said how he learned to really hear. One night he had to get across this minefield, and the only way to do it was to go at night and listen to the patrols walking, so that you can figure out, where to walk. But you have to do it just by hearing where they're.
Yeah.
Anyway, so then he, from there, I think for a while he was also in the CIA. So he was, a spy, and that's where he learned that's where he started to learn other languages. I think he learned, we have to pass as a native speaker. So he learned Italian first, and then he learned German. And so yeah. I mean, John was the most, when I was a student, you walk in there, I'd never seen any professor. This guy was not like your typical college professor.
He sort of floated down the stairs, did he?
Yeah. But so that was his background. And when he came back to the school, I mean, after he got out of that, right, he went from being Green Beret CIA, went back to the university. This is now kind of the mid to late 60s when there's all this revolution happening. So according to John, he went from being a CIA agent to the head of the Communist Party, at his university, so because, and John actually wrote a book on Marxist economics.
Really?
So when I first heard of John, he was kind of the typical radical professor. He would get students to lie across the freeway in protest of the Vietnam War, which was
all right. Okay.
And then Bandler was also, just he's brilliant, but also very came from a very difficult background. But they had met at UC Santa Cruz, and Bandler got into, at this time was also this explosion of personal development, where people like Fritz Perls was starting to do these Gestalt groups. And the idea of personal growth was no longer you had to have a white coat and be in a hospital. It was starting to come out to everybody could, grow, have some kind of this sort of personal growth movement. And so, very interesting, little bit of interesting history there. There was a very influential book that came out that was called, let's see, I think it was called Gestalt Therapy Verbatim.
Okay.
And it was done by a guy named John Stevens, who later in the NLP world, most people would know him as Steve Andreas. So John Stevens, his mother, Barry Stevens, was very close with Fritz Perls, and John Stevens did this first thing where he did a transcript book of Fritz Perls working with people, and it was very popular. So this other publisher wanted to do the same thing. And at that time, Richard Bandler was working for this publisher, like, I don't know, stacking books or something. But this guy said, "Hey, we have these audio tapes of Fritz Perls. We want to turn a book at it. Would you listen to the video audio tapes? And we're going to, kind of extract from them, the stuff that we'll put in the book."
Yeah.
So Richard Bandler was sitting there, kind of absorbing all of these things. And then he started running Gestalt groups. So Richard Bandler was running these Gestalt groups, and I think he started running them with Frank Puselic.
Yes. Okay.
And the big thing that happened that started meta. I mean, that was kind of the meta beginnings. And then John Grinder came in. Richard Bandler, was trying to get John to come in and see what they were doing. And John, of course, being the sort of radical professor, was going, well, that's just the people the bourgeois wallowing in their problems or something. But because that's what they thought about therapy in those days. But Bandler is very persuasive, and he finally got Grinder to come and see what he was doing with Frank Pucelik.
Okay.
And Grinder was impressed, because he could see that, okay, you are really, actually, influencing people, which is what he also wanted to do politically.
I get that. Yeah.
Yeah. So he made this deal with Bandler, which was sort of what started NLP, where he said, okay, Bandler, if you teach me to do what you're doing, I'll tell you what you're doing. And that's what started NLP. And it was not just a tit for tat. I mean, Grinder was very clear. He said, you can't make a model of a language that you can't speak. So you have to teach it to me first, and then I can tell you what you're doing linguistically. And that's kind of how it all started. In the beginning, Bandler was kind of the out there explorer, and Grinder was the one who would sort of code it. He would put it, organize it. And then they began to sort of weave back and forth and kind of co-develop together. But I would say that was sort of that movement to neuro-linguistic programming. Then they started doing this modeling of Virginia Satir, where she was working with parts. Mm-hmm. And then this whole notion of the representational systems began to emerge. And I think that's when meta started really becoming not just about language, but, the whole nervous system.
Trying to explain submodalities and internal representational systems to someone in one conversation is near impossible. To even conceptualize it from an enigma of whatever it was, to even put boundaries around it so we can talk about it. That would have, was that an epiphany, or was that like a month, 3 months had passed and then they sort of started to slowly put the pieces of, because it's like putting a puzzle together without seeing the finished image of the puzzle. You're figuring
it's almost like you guys pulled on a thread, and then all of a sudden you start finding all this stuff.
Yeah, you guys, I think that's a really great characterization of it. Because you're those days were very much exploratory. With things like how eye movements came about and all of that. It was really it came, I think, from a very how do I say, just a major curiosity about people and how they worked. And it didn't start, NLP didn't start with all these tools and models. It started with this basic, and Bandler has been very clear about that. He's always said, NLP is essentially an attitude, and it's the process of modeling. It's not what he calls the trail of techniques that have left behind. Right. That NLP is an attitude. It's this sense of curiosity of, we like to say, what's the difference that makes the difference?
Yes.
So when and how does something work? John Grinder would say, all of NLP came from the single question, which was, how? How do you know that? How does that work? How do you do that?
Hey, it's time.
And I think
denormalization.
So that's this whole thing. So it was, and when we were writing the NLP Volume 1. Some modalities were not really a part of it yet. You had what was called, you had strategies at that point. So that you had this visual to auditory to visual kinesthetic, so you would have a sequence of these representational systems that were about how, people would, it's kind of like, it was like the early days of programming, of computer programming. What's that inner program? And then you began to realize, okay, you can't just explain something completely through representational systems. There's these there's something more granular, something more nuanced there, in order to really be able to understand it, and not just understand it, but to actually replicate it. Because you got to remember, the whole key to NLP was not just, hey, let's understand something. It's you've got to be able to replicate it, and then you've got to be able to teach it to somebody else. It was very American, and I would say in that way that it's extremely pragmatic. It's not just, hey, isn't this an interesting idea? It's what can you do with it? That was always a big question. All right, so you have these submodalities, great. What can you do with it? And that was what Bandler and Grinder were always asking.
So in order to keep the motivation to keep going and the excitement that you had in the early days, I would assume you had guinea pigs that you were trialing it on and getting results along the way. Would you just grab students and say, hey, you want to be a guinea pig for our meta class? And then you would you would change their modalities and all of a sudden they didn't like chocolate? I mean, is that as easy as how it was?
That's essentially how it was. Yes. No, I mean, I think that's what was one of the great things also about the University of California, Santa Cruz. So you had a lot of students, you had a lot of young people, you had people who, I mean, and the University of California at Santa Cruz was it was an experimental university. You know, when I was there, there were no grades. You didn't have grades. You basically got an evaluation from your professor. So there were no grades. You know, there was back in those days, this was, you know, it was, you know, co-ed dorms, co-ed bathrooms, you know, everything.
How free?
It started in the 1960s and was the brainchild of this guy who had a very big vision of, you know, a whole different way of doing education. So the people that were there were also kind of, I like to say, Santa Cruz was sort of the California of California. It's about as progressive as you can get, you know, especially in those days. And so, yeah, there was a lot of people that would just be interested in exploring something.
Amazing. So in Forrest Gump,
yes,
is that the type during the '60s era when you know everyone was wearing the peace sign and the rose-colored glasses? Is that what we're talking about here?
It was quite a bit like that. Yes,
really.
It was quite a bit like that. Yeah.
This is amazing. love the history. Love the history.
And you know, and I do think it's important because that is sort of as I said, you know, sort of the environment out of which NLP came. And that's why it's still coming back to people who come to the UC Santa Cruz, that come to our NLP university programs. You know, you're in the redwoods, you know, you've got deer over here, you know, you've got, I mean, you're just, it's a very unique environment.
Almost boundary.
I'm not sure NLP could have come from anywhere else. I mean,
there's no boundaries at all. From the area, and therefore your thinking, there's no bounds on your thinking. So you could go anywhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, I mean, my mind's going at a million miles an hour. Cal, I'm hogging all the questions. Sorry.
That's cool.
When did it become a thing for a certification? So when did it go from meta to NLP, and then all of a sudden there were now standards involved in a curriculum and levels of certification?
Yeah. So first of all, you know, after they modeled Erickson, Bandler and Grinder, and they had this structure of magic book, and you know, again, the field of psychotherapy, especially at that time, was in a lot of transition, you know, because you were moving from these very, you know, what was basically you had before that was Skinner or something like this, you know, where you had these, there was no real cognitive science at all. I would say NLP was probably the beginning of actual cognitive science. And so Bandler and Grinder started going around, and they were teaching these Erickson patterns and, you know, teaching the meta model. And they started getting called all over the place, you know, to go do workshops and seminars. And then we did the same thing. You know, we were students. We started going out and presenting things, teaching things. And so NLP began to become, you know, something that people wanted to learn.
Okay.
And so, and you know, Bandler and Grinder were always looking for, you know, ways to, this is the other aspect, you know, that they were also looking for ways to, let's call it, monetize what they were doing.
Yeah, that's
every year they would have a new idea that was going to make them millionaires by Christmas. We're going to be millionaires by Christmas, which of course now is not such a big deal, but in the 70s that was a lot.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what part of the idea was, okay, let's start to organize this. And and then they started, you know, Richard was married, Leslie Cameron, who was, his and John was married to Judith Delosier. We started kind of wanting to build an actual, you know, an institute that was called the DOTAR, the Division of Training and Research. So John Grinder had a company called Unlimited Limited, and Richard had a company called Not Limited, you know, because LTD, you know, so Unlimited Limited and Not Limited got together, and they started this Division of Training and Research. And I designed the NLP logo. My father was a intellectual property lawyer. And we're trying to, register that. And then people like me, David Gordon, Leslie, we were sort of the second tier. We started organizing what would be in a practitioner program. How would you assess it? So I would say that was all happening around 1978, 79.
Late 70s, yeah.
Yeah, late 70s. And then then the Institute started sprouting up in different places, and we started traveling around, and we would bring these courses then to all of these different training institutes. And then I would say it was probably, again, around the late 1970, 1980, then there started to be the trainer trainings and training people to do that. Also, Steve Andreas, published, Frogs into Princes, which was that was an extremely popular book because it was another one of these transcript books. It was very lively. It really, showed sort of the brilliance of what they were doing. So suddenly NLP became, extremely popular, and we were sort of trying to create a way to organize it. But to be honest, neither Bandler nor Grinder were particularly, that was not their strong point, let's say. So, NLP just started going out, and anybody who read the book was doing it. And so then I think that kind of led to this unfortunate sort of dual reputation of NLP, which is, okay, it's something that's really popular, but people also consider it manipulative or a pseudoscience. And so you got the two aspects that at the beginning, they were trying to make it something that was very, clear and structurally organized, maybe.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in finding a little bit more about your contributions to the field. Around that time, you were dealing with an advanced technology, in my opinion, because it hadn't really been discovered before, and not at least in the form that you guys were using it in. And to many, it would have appeared to be like magic, like Arthur C. Clarke's law.
Yes.
Any
Right.
sufficiently
developed.
Appears indistinguishable from magic. It would have been that air about it too. And I'm interested in talking about that because one of the contributions that you made is sleight of mouth. And to people looking at conversational change in that way, it does. It was the thing that fascinated me the most around master practice, that and values, learning about values and criteria. But learning about sleight of mouth and learning how much change you can create conversationally with people was just absolutely fascinating. And when you see somebody that can do it well, and it's funny because some people seem to pick it up a lot quicker than other people.
Right.
They just get it instantly. And for some people, it becomes like the hardest topic that they learn. When did you get in the invention room and start to go, hold on a second, I've got something really special here to add to all of this that we're working on?
Good question.
Yeah. So, so I was saying we started this division of training and research in 1979. And so then there was a building here in Santa Cruz, and that's where we were there, all of us would be there, and we could really, that's where there was actually a lot of development able to be going on. And so I think I was the director of research. So we was, interested in researching, taking NLP, where could you apply it? Now, at that time, we were all, again, people were very interested. We were all interested in exploring all kinds of different things, right? It was not just therapy. That's when we started looking at education and business and all these other applications for NLP. Anyway, one of the things that Bandler was always very interested in was actually magic. And so he had a guy that he was working with who was a sleight of hand expert, right? With card magic, so you could do cards. And actually, Richard had a concept that he called sleight of mind, and sleight of mind meant.
Oh, I like that.
Sleight of mind was how is it that sleight of hand works? it's because you set up an expectation, people are expecting something, and then they're surprised because it comes out some other way. It's the ace suddenly becomes a joker or whatever. So it was looking at he called it sleight of mind and the fabric of reality. So the idea of the fabric of reality is, Richard was always really interested in how people build their realities. We can have such fundamentally different realities, even people experiencing the exact same environment.
Hey guys, Kallum and Conor here from Connect Coaching. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Unplugged Podcast. We're jumping in to let you know about something really exciting, the Forever Client Matrix.
Absolutely. What we love doing is lighting people up and having them realize that their future is bright, and most importantly, making a difference in this world. So we are very excited to be able to share this with you.
If you want to turn every prospect into a forever client, then please click on the link below in the description and get instant access now to your preview of the Forever Client Matrix.
Enjoy.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I, again, partially because of my work with, I got out of politics and started doing other applications, but I still was very interested in people that had used language to change the world. I mean, I of course had studied Erickson and was looking at Erickson's patterns and realizing that Erickson did things that were not just in the Milton model, right? So he would he would say things that you couldn't just say that was the Milton model. He would do something like when he would say to the guy, the guy who thinks he's Jesus Christ, I understand you have experience as a carpenter. It's like, that's brilliant, but that's not the meta model. That's not how specific, so I was thinking, what's that? What's that about? That's something else. It's some kind of more of an inner gymnastic. And then I realized from looking at, again, people that I had studied for, going everywhere from Jesus to Martin Luther King Jr. to, looking at expert legal people and so on and so forth, started realizing there's some other level of patterning that's going on here. And so and then, I had been looking at the idea of strategies, right? Cognitive strategies. And you start to realize, okay, the strategy, like spelling strategy, that was one of the things that one of my first developments. How do you spell, but you start to realize, well, there's other things that will override that. And that's where this whole notion of values, beliefs. So we were also looking at criteria, values, and beliefs were starting to really come out. So I became very interested in working with beliefs, and just began to realize, okay, there's a level of languaging that's not just about what, how, where, when. It's all about why. And that level is, was what kind of led me into the notion of sleight of mouth. And I wrote about it in the first book, but when there was an aha moment with sleight of mouth, and that was where I remember it was in Washington, D.C., and we were doing some kind of seminar, and it was during a kind of a not easy period in Richard's life at the time. And anyway, remember he got some guy on the stage and he was doing this demo with him and was starting to make a point, because whatever Richard would try to do with this guy would sort of find some way to get around it, or, to discount it or something. And Richard finally got pissed, and he started putting this guy in the same thing and putting the whole group into this, this whole kind of, I don't know what you call it, this bind, where he would say, this person's out to get me and help me. And they would say, well, what's his positive intention? And say, yeah, you can sit there thinking about his positive intention. You're not in danger. I'm in danger right now, and someone else would say, you're right, he's out to get you. And then he'd say, okay, well, you throw him out of the room. And the person would go, oh, well, and he'd say, oh, you weren't serious about that. You're lying to me. You're with him. So Richard created this whole big paranoid scenario. But I realized as he was doing it, he was doing these patterns, right? If somebody went to something in the present, he would change the time frame. If somebody went to something here, he would go to another level. And I suddenly realized that has a structure.
Yeah.
And I could do it. This is the whole idea of modeling. I suddenly realized, okay, I could do what he was doing now. I could, make these, what we call these kinds of verbal reframes. And so that was what really, got me thinking, okay, this has a structure, and I started putting down that structure. So it was actually this moment when Richard was spontaneously doing it.
And that's when you...
That was the moment that this clicked. I'd been interested in it, but when I could see that he was doing this intentionally, and no matter what somebody did, he could find some other way around it. I went, okay, that has a structure.
I think that example is really interesting, because one of the things about sleight of mouth, for those who haven't heard about it, it's about changing perceptions in one's mind.
Yes.
About changing someone's beliefs. It's about affecting their behaviors. And in that example, I'll call it, he was casting a spell almost, because you said
exactly.
Paranoid dome over the whole experience, and he almost changed reality for everyone within that bubble. It was like a delusion they then had to take part of, because they were accepting what his speech as being true. And
the interesting thing, Kallum, is that, and I think that people knew he was doing it on purpose. And people knew that he was doing it on purpose. I mean, they knew he wasn't paranoid. He was creating this paranoid thing because again, he was doing it as a kind of a point to this person.
Example.
It was, but so they know, okay, we're caught in this bubble. We know it's a synthetic bubble, but we don't know how to get out of it. I remember he was going, at one point, Richard was going, help me, can't somebody help me? And somebody goes, well, can I get you some chicken soup? Or, because
they're trying to pump the bubble.
Because they knew whatever they tried to say, if you try to enter into it, you're already inside.
You're part of it.
You're in the vortex.
You're part of it.
And that's the interesting thing. I mean, for the application of it in changing someone who may be in therapy or in business, or changing them to empower them, using it as a tool of empowerment. It effectively is magic, because if you're able to change someone's perceptions, they start to see their reality in a different way. They start to believe new things, and they start to act differently.
Yes.
You've affected their complete existence and their reality as a result. So absolutely. Were you in that moment, were you aware of the other ways it could be applied? Were you aware of the gravity of
Yes, because like I said, it had been something that had been, sort of cooking in the back of my mind for a long time, because I was saying, well, I knew Milton Erickson on a personal level, when in his healing work, right, was doing something different than just the meta model or the Milton model. It wasn't just embedded suggestions. It was this whole, a whole way of shifting people's perceptions. I mean, a lot of these Erickson examples, he says one or two sentences and you have this whole other reality. But also, I had been looking at, people who had made positive change in the world through language. So I knew, yes, you could use it in this other way, that where you're actually creating, like I say, if you take somebody like Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, here he's using language in order to create the possibility, this other possibility that would have seemed, again, impossible at that time. So you can use language, like the subtitle of the latest volume of Sleight of Mouth is, how words can change worlds, how words create worlds. And so I think that, so Kallum, definitely I knew that. And it was just sort of that realization that, okay, there is a pattern here. You can use that pattern sort of either way. You could create a paranoid bubble, or you could create the opposite. You could create like what I think people used to say about Steve Jobs, that, in spite of all of his many faults, he had this capability to create what they called a reality distortion field, which made you believe that everything was, anything was possible, and that you could do it, And so that's sort of the opposite of the paranoid bubble, if you will.
The ultimate of personal growth, isn't it, with Steve?
Yes.
To do it linguistically, or it's like creating a linguistic magic wand, I think.
Yes, that's a great analogy. Yes.
So how did you know, I'm done with these sleight of mouth? Did you start off with 3 and then you kept sort of thinking, and then it was 4, and then you got to 14?
Yeah.
How did it How did it,
Yeah,
you know?
it's a good question, Connor, because normally,
Yeah.
we'd say in NLP, you go, okay, you got to keep it 7 plus or minus 2. 5 is 5 is the best. 9 is about the limit. So getting 14 is already it's 2 times 7. That's the way I thought about it. Okay,
2 groups.
you can chunk it. It's actually 2 sevens, but no, I mean it was definitely something that was sort of more kind of organic. It was just going, okay, there was all these these examples, and could I how do I say describe it, describe the pattern, and I think it's, as you say, you start with a smaller group, then you start finding the so-called counterexamples, right? This doesn't fit there, it doesn't fit there, it doesn't fit there. How do I, describe that or explain that? And especially if I can generate multiple examples of this other pattern, then it must be a pattern. It's not just a single sort of an outlier, if you will.
I mean, I'm just associating myself as someone who's creating this. Did your sensory acuity just go off the Richter scale for a period of time, and you were listening to every single conversation thinking, is that another one? Is that another one? Or is that like this one? Like that would have been all that you were thinking for a period of time, and maybe picking it up everywhere you went.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you mentioned that, because I think in the early days of NLP, we had this what to call it, this sort of luxury, if you will, of being able to. I remember when we were first learning the meta model, for instance, we would simply take one pattern and you just listen to that for a whole week. You just look, so you just zero in, and believe me, you learn a lot. Or when I remember this first notion, I was actually the first one to actually write down the eye movements, and I remember when I first got that. I remember I went up to John Drinder gave us this very interesting assignment. This was my second class that I took with him, and he gave us this interesting assignment. It was a much smaller group, but he gave us this assignment to find something that we had never paid attention to before, and give it a name, and then notice how your experience changes of it if you name it.
Absolutely.
And so I went up to him after class, and I was kind of talking about, what do you mean by that? And, how to get it. And he said, well, what about that? And I said, what? And he said, well, your eyes just went to the side when you were, when you were talking to me. I went, oh, that's interesting. I never paid attention to that. And what I noticed had happened is I had kind of gone inside, so I called it unconscious cueing. So I just sort of started this name, unconscious, like micro cues. And kind of like you mentioned, Conor, it was like suddenly it was like these scales fell from my eyes.
Yeah.
And I would be sitting in class, and there's people looking out and making these things and doing this. And it was like overwhelming. I was going, stop, because all of a sudden this floodgate opens where your acuity opens. And then you got to sort through it all, because there's so many different of these things. And I think it's a lot like that too with these patterns, where you're listening to all the different things that people do with language that we take for granted. But if you start actually trying to listen with that question, how is that working? How does that happen? What's the difference making the difference? It's it's a very, let's put it this way, it's a very stimulating experience.
It would be overwhelming. I mean, I'm just imagining it, but you lived it. So yeah.
Was it hard to talk to? I went through this stage where I first finished Practical Master Program, I think, and it was just hard to talk to like other people that hadn't done NLP before. And I'm sure the level you guys were doing it at, it just seems like it was like an whole other level.
Yeah. I think this is where things like rapport come in. And I was always, I think it's why I became a trainer, is that I always felt I could explain something to other people, in a way that they could understand it.
Right.
So I wasn't just using jargon. And still to this day, I think that's one of the things that people would often say, is that my way is to try to make something simple, not to use the jargon and make it complex. So, one when my kids were really little, we would, do NLP, but in very simple forms. And, so I think it's always a matter of adjusting to whoever is your audience. And that to me is part of the fun of it. How do I create this bridge, to here's all this very cool stuff. And how can I start to create this bridge so that other people can start to, get a sense of it and a taste of it. Yeah.
So we have sleight of mouth and logical levels, and then score. And so did logical levels come about after sleight of mouth?
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole thing about the levels was that, so one of the classes that I took also at the UC Santa Cruz when I was first, around the same time I was taking classes with John Grinder, took a class with Gregory Bateson, who was also a professor there. And he's the one that said, put Bandler and Grinder in touch with Erickson. Or maybe I didn't say that, Erickson.
I think was Bateson the one who studied Fritz Perl, whose mother was friends with Fritz Perl?
No, that's John Stevens, Steve Andreas.
Steve Andreas, got it. Okay, yes.
No, but so the interesting thing, Bateson was his first wife was Margaret Mead, who was another famous anthropologist. And in the 1930s, they went to study, they were in Bali, which in that time was
that would have been exotic.
Yeah, very different places, not the tourist place that it is today.
Yeah.
But they, Balinese have this sort of trance dancing thing that they do. They still do today. And so Bateson was trying to understand trance dancing. And he had, through a mutual friend, Aldous Huxley, who was another famous person of his time. Aldous Huxley had done some stuff with Erickson, but was also a friend of the Bateson family, who was kind of the Batesons were sort of an intellectual family. Gregory Bateson was named after Gregor Mendel, and Gregory Bateson's father is the one who termed the coin genetics.
Right.
So
okay.
So this is the Batesons were this again intellectual British family. So anyway, Bateson went to see Erickson in the 1930s to study something about trance. So he knew Erickson from that time, and of course, he became fascinated with what Erickson was doing with his therapies. And Bateson would periodically send people down to try to understand Erickson, like J. Healy, Paul Watzlawick. I mean, a lot of these people who became sort of well-known later on. So Bateson, actually, he's the one that, after he read Structure of Magic, he sent Bandler and Grinder down to see Erickson to see if they could figure out what he was doing. And they came back with, the Milton model, which then started that whole area of development. But where were we in the story? Was
the logical levels.
Order of
the logical levels. I was in the class with Gregory, and the other class called Ecology of Mind. And Bateson, in addition to being one of the so-called founders of modern systems theory, cybernetics, he had done a lot of work, with animals. He studied animals. Anyway, he came up with this whole notion of logical levels of learning. The notion of logical levels was originally, from Bertrand Russell. Russell and Whitehead wrote a book on where he talked about that you had these different levels of logic, and Bateson applied it to animal behavior. And so he had, most people don't know this, he had level 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So level 0 is no learning, right? You just keep doing the same thing no matter what. Mm. Level 1 is adaptive learning, kind of like the Pavlovian learning, right? So you get reinforced, and so this is, your reaction to, you're adapting to environmental stimuli, etc. But level 2 was interesting because level 2 was a categorical change in level 1, meaning, so like say level 1 is in animal behavior, I'm approaching something or avoiding it, or I'm communicating, or I'm, going into
instinctual in a way, almost.
Yeah, but it's again, it's Pavlovian. It's it's basic, stimulus response. Let's say.
Yeah.
But level two would be, like level two would be, level one is, okay, I ring the bell, Pavlov's dogs, to give it food. Pretty soon it starts to associate the bell with the food. And so I ring the bell and it starts to salivate. That's level one. Level two would be, what would need to happen if I suddenly rang the bell and the dog, instead of salivating, it gets scared and runs away? It would mean that bell would suddenly have to signal something a completely different category of behavior. Once you start taking the pyramid here, level one is kind of, I'm developing this capability. Level two is suddenly I believe that something suddenly has become dangerous. And I used to give the example, level two would be, if you, I remember in 9/11, after the attacks, the terrorist attacks, people suddenly were afraid to fly. Flying was dangerous. So I said, level one would be, people stop flying because you have lousy service, bad food, high prices. That would be level one. But level two is suddenly overnight, right? Overnight, nobody's flying. So that's suddenly, that's a really different kind of learning. It's not like slowly over time. So that was what he called level two. So level three would be if you rang the bell and Pavlov's dog suddenly started meowing like a cat instead of barking like a dog. Meaning level three is now not just a different category of behavior, it's a whole different system of behaviors. And he said most animals are incapable of level three, right? Most, like a cat, you can't make it bark like a dog, or a dog meow like a cat. However, if you look at human children,
Humans can.
My kids were meowing like cats, or barking like dogs, flapping their arms like birds. I mean, so we have this, more and more higher level animals have this capability to actually expand its whole system of behavior. Now, in the pyramid, that's what you call identity, versus the level two is belief. So for me, Bateson had these different levels, and I thought, wow, this is so important. But it was really difficult to know how to use it, I remember, so here's this sort of moment. I remember it was 1986. I was in Oslo, Norway. I was on this boat with somebody where we had just done a seminar, and we were talking about Bateson, and he was also a fan of Bateson, and we were talking about this notion of the different levels of learning. And we were both agreeing that they were very important. And I remember saying to him, yeah, this is really important. Somebody should do something practical with that. And as soon as those words left my mouth, I went, I guess that's me.
That's me. Yeah.
That somebody is me. So how would I do that? And since I was using sleight of mouth, I mean, this is an interesting idea, or part of this path. I had become very aware that, you could use a certain pattern, and that pattern could have more or less impact depending upon, the kind of language that you used in that pattern. So in other words, let's make a really simple example. If I said, I don't like your environment. I think your environment really needs to change. You go, okay, thanks for thank you. If somebody said, I don't like your behavior. I think you need to change that behavior. You go, well, were you talking to me? If they said, the way you think, I don't like the way you think. The way you think is wrong. You need to change that. You're going to be kind of going, yeah. If somebody goes, hey, you know what? Your values are totally wrong. You need to change your values. You go, your beliefs. You talking to me? Those are fighting words. And then if you say you are wrong, right? You need, you should be somebody else. So you're going, well, what's happening there?
See the levels there, yeah.
You start to hear, okay, all this changing is, it's the same structure, but what's shifting is a word that is directing you towards some other level, right? It's getting to this other level. And so that started getting me to think about that. Okay, what's the difference at making the difference? Why is it I use the same sleight of mouth pattern, but I use this word instead of that word, and it becomes fighting words, or it becomes, identity change instead of, just, something that a person is considering as an interesting idea. So again, I think all of the main things in NLP come from what's known as what you call heuristic, meaning it doesn't come from some kind of, intellectual analytical thing. It comes from you try it, you get an idea, you put that idea into practice, you try it more times, and you finally start figuring out, okay, this is, there's actually a pattern here.
Yeah.
So it all comes from, doing it, not just thinking about it.
Practical application.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that now. It's like saying to someone, your behavior is childish versus you are childish.
Yeah. Or that's a childish belief that you have there,
Correct.
Yeah. And because, and if you think about it, so that's why when I often draw the pyramid, I draw it as a kind of a tree structure, they call it. So you have your identity is this node. That identity you can build on these certain core values and beliefs, which then are going to facilitate, they're going to reinforce certain capabilities, and they're going to, filter out others. So that identity starts to create then certain pattern of behavior will sort of, cascade out of that.
That could be off.
So
I'm thinking, is there a connection almost with Maslow's hierarchy of needs at the different levels there?
I think, there's a lot of connections. I think anything that, this is one of the things I've found, is that anything that has some kind of actual pragmatic value, you can find parallels in other places. So I think Maslow's for sure. On another side, it also has, connections to the so-called, what do you call them? No, wait a minute.
Criteria?
No. I don't know why I'm spacing on this word right now. I'll think of it in a minute. But there are different types of leveling, sorts of models, and I think levels parallels a lot of those.
Yeah.
So with the logical levels, am I right in thinking it kind of maps out also someone's current model of the world as well?
Yes.
You can map out their model of the world, and that's why it kind of goes into that next level at the top where you start to talk about purpose, and from that all of that structure underneath it, I guess not just purpose, but the meaning someone derives from their experience as well.
Yeah.
And is that what you're looking at holistically when you're looking at an individual, you're looking at an organization, when you're looking at how best to change that? Is that sort of the next?
Yeah. So, this is one of the things that we would say, how can you use that pyramid of levels? It's a great change management tool, because you've got a present state and you have a desired state, and then you have a path, you have resources that are going to get you there. So, first thing you got to do, it's the simplest, most direct way. And I think one of the other things that really, for me, solidified that as a model was the fact that I could relate each level to a very fundamental question, right? So you start, if somebody has a problem, you start going, well, where and when do you have the problem? Right. The environment, where and when. What happens when you have that problem? What goes on, right? Well, I want to do this, but this happens instead. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I wonder how that happens, right? How is it that you want this, but that's happening? So now you're at this how level. Then, you're going, okay, if that's the way it's happening, I wonder why it's happening that way. It's sort of it's the most natural progression if you're sort of wanting to understand, how something is functioning. And then, okay, if it's this, you have this, the why would be, whether it's because of these priorities, because of these beliefs about what those priorities. Well, okay, who are you if you have those priorities and those beliefs? It's gonna, there's some kind of a role, there's some kind of a mission that's going to, consolidate to. Then, so you've got, where, when, that's environment, what, behavior, how, capabilities, why, values and beliefs, whose, identity. And then you got this purpose. So, well, if this is the whom, for whom, for what, what, if I have this role, what is that? That role is clearly asserting something. It's part of something bigger than me. And I think, sometimes at that top of the pyramid, there's a whole kind of an inverted pyramid there, because you can have,
wondered about that.
For whom is my family, my professional, my larger community, I have a role in a whole number of different, let's say bigger systems, if you will. So, what's this I think is the, so when you're looking at a problem state, okay, how many levels is this problem, affecting, or how many levels is it on? And then in the desired state, so you're saying, well, in your desired state, where and when would you want it to be different? What's going to be different? How will you be different? What beliefs, what's going to be the different priorities, values? I mean, it's the perfect way to actually do any kind of, whether it's personal change management, team management, organizational management. That's one of the I think one of the beauties of the pyramid is that you can apply it on any sort of level of a system.
There's so much of business that we could unpack as well. I'm conscious of time.
Absolutely.
Robert, where do you said 50 years. So where do you see the future of NLP, and how are you celebrating 50 years?
Wow. Well, I think that's a great question. So first of all, I think, to me, the past, present, and future of NLP is all going to be founded in modeling, right? So, the reason that NLP continues to stay around, if you look at something like Gestalt therapy, or you look at something like rational emotive, whatever, or CBIT, etc., they're not based on modeling, they're a very limited thing. 25 years ago almost now, Judith Delosier and I wrote this 1,600-page encyclopedia of NLP, where you see all these applications, in every part of your life, whereas you take Gestalt therapy, you can't apply that to education. You can't apply that. I mean, you can apply it in some ways, I suppose, but NLP, I remember somebody once asked me, do you use NLP yourself? I said, well, I think I must use NLP for everything except maybe breathing. And then I have second thoughts about that. I think I probably breathing too. But I mean, you can use it for everything.
Yeah.
So I think, NLP has this way of going about, this process of modeling by which you go about, you're asking that question, what's the difference that makes the difference? How do you do it? How can we structure it? Neuro-linguistically. I mean, one of the reasons that I think sleight of mouth, what you do is you're taking language and saying it's not just language, it's a mindset, it's a way of thinking, it's a neuro-linguistic program. A belief is a neuro-linguistic program. And so since I think as human beings, we are always going to be neuro-linguistic, it's in you
can't unhear it. You can't unlearn it once you.
You can't get out of it. I mean, now I think, if I start looking to the future of NLP, I think one of the clear things that is going to be have some major role is going to be AI, because AI is really, I mean, first of all, going hand in hand with NLP can be extremely powerful. You're going to be able to have tremendous shortcuts. What kind of things AI can do? There's actually a group in France that has created a coaching bot.
Yes, there's a few
called Robert Dilts.
Not myself. Amazing.
Robot Dilts, which is an AI Robert Dilts chatbot, and it gives pretty good advice. But going beyond advice is going to be interesting. If you look at what these AI things do, is it going to ever actually be able to really coach somebody? I don't know. It's going to be interesting.
On the fly.
It's going to really be able to be generative. I don't know. But I think
the explanation you had of Milton Erickson saying,
I was going to say,
the guy that thought he was Jesus, I know a little bit about carpentry. Where does that come from? And can that be regenerated?
Can that be done? That's going to be an interesting thing to find out. But one of the things I do know, for example, I had this really interesting kind of mind-blowing experience where I took an article, I wrote a 3-page article, stuck it into, I think it was Microsoft Notebook or something, and it generated a 15-minute podcast of 2 people talking about this thing. And it was not a repetition of anything I said, it was actually a really, really good podcast about this 3-page article I fed into the thing.
Wow.
And, now you're going to be able to, for example, have, we're talking about Milton Erickson. You'll be able to have the AI will be able to model his voice. You feed it in his works, and you will be able to have you guys could have a podcast. I imagine
Milton
probably
Erickson?
within a few years, you'll be having a
that.
podcast with Milton Erickson.
That
You're
would
going to
blow
have
my
Avatar
mind.
Erickson. You can ask him questions, and he will be answering those questions. I mean, I think that's going to be kind of an interesting future possibility.
Wow. That's pretty
I
cool.
mean, it won't be necessarily Erickson coming up with something new, but there's a lot of stuff he's already done. So I think it's going to be a really interesting future. But I think NLP. The good news about NLP is that it, of course, is not artificial intelligence. It's human intelligence. It really truly is generative, meaning creating the new solutions that don't exist yet. And to me, that should be the future of NLP. And if it can't generate the new solutions that don't exist yet, it will fade away like many other things. But as long as NLP can keep refreshing itself and keep renewing itself through modeling, right? Not just through, okay, here's this toolbox that existed. That toolbox is going to become more and more obsolete as time goes on. Some tools are of course fundamental. But the great thing about NLP is that I think it's going to keep evolving as we do.
And 50 years for yourself? Are you celebrating somewhere? 50 years is
so 50 years. Yes, it's a big marker. We are going to have a 50th anniversary celebration up at the University of California at Santa Cruz.
all right, cool.
Where it
NLP.
started.
Yes, so that we call it the Mecca of NLP. And I thought if anybody wants to come to the Mecca of NLP, the 50th anniversary is a good excuse. But when we also our NLP University will be also its 35th anniversary. And our encyclopedia is 25th anniversary. There's a lot of anniversaries here. And so we're having a master trainer training up there, and then we'll be doing a anniversary event, 50th anniversary event. And our idea is we'll have people coming from all over the world that have done developments in many different areas, as we were just talking about, who have used NLP to, bring change in multiple fields.
And if someone wants
That's
to,
in August, right? That's in August.
In August, August 2025.
Yeah.
University of California at Santa Cruz.
and is it an open invitation for the 50-year anniversary? Someone can just find on your website.
Anybody. Yeah, you can, nlpu.com or robertdilts.com. They both go to the same place. For other things, there's another one of the developments that I've done in the past years is we call it success factor modeling, which is sort of an expansion of NLP, because a lot of NLP was designed to look at an individual and model an individual rather than a whole team or a group or an organization. So success factor modeling is looking at organizations and groups. And so I have another website for that called Dilts Strategy Group, diltstrategygroup.com, and there's a number of books that are available there. So,
And if the intention of the strategy that you just mentioned, if someone was looking to upskill themselves in what to work with businesses for their own personal growth, to work with clients.
Yeah.
It'll be done.
So the success factor modeling it's an interesting thing. We say that this notion of success factor modeling, which comes from, again, looking at successful individuals, teams, organizations. One of the things that we say is, which I think hopefully is sort of goes without saying, is that if somebody wants to take their business to the next level, you got to take yourself to the next level. You're not going to stay the same and have your business go to the next level. It doesn't work that way. So the idea of success factor modeling is an inextricable connection between personal growth and professional growth. So if I want to grow my business, I've got to grow me.
Yes.
And if I grow me, I'm gonna want to, have that, come out in what I'm doing. So SFM is looking at how that works. And so we have, there's been several different areas that we've looked at. One is what we call next generation entrepreneur, we define a next generation entrepreneur as somebody who wants to live their passion, live your dream and make a better world through your business. Most people think, okay, I've got to give up what I love to make for my business, or it's like you have work life. This is my work, this is my life. And say, for me, it's never been that way. This is my life.
Yes.
This is my passion. This is my dream, and I have good business with it. So I know it's possible. I think
that
people
aligns
like
with us very, very, very well.
Yeah. And then the next one is called generative collaboration, which is about releasing the creative potential of collective intelligence. And this has to do with this idea of, that all of us are smarter than one of us, or, that there is if I even look at NLP was not just John Grinder, it wasn't just Richard Bandler. It's something happened when Richard Bandler, John Grinder got together. A third thing happened. It wasn't just 1 + 1 makes 2, right? It was 1 + 1 starts to make, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
Same with
That's an
Wozniak and
example.
Jobs. Suddenly there's a third thing that starts to emerge, like hydrogen and oxygen making water. If you take the hydrogen away, there's only oxygen. You take the oxygen away, there's only hydrogen. Where's the water, right? Well, the water is this dynamic. And so this book is about, that's the holy grail of teams, that
Absolutely.
you want the sum, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Then the third is called conscious leadership and resilience. And it's about, we call it orchestrating innovation and fitness for the future. Speaking about the future. So one of the things we've seen, especially like in this last pandemic and before that, some of the economic crises, is that companies that have been around for a long time disappear.
Yes.
Because they're not fit for the future, right? And we say, the past is not a great predictor of the future. We were talking about Arthur Clarke earlier, Kallum, and I think one of the other quotes I love is, he says, the future is not what it used to be. Future is changing a lot. So that book is about that. And then we also have, as part of that series, there's what we call generative consulting, which is, again, helping businesses to be prepared for the future. And we don't have a book yet on this now, but I've been doing for the past years, actually started it before the pandemic, but it really ramped up during the pandemic, is a success factor modeling for effective healthcare. Looking at healthcare ecosystem, not just looking at a doctor-patient relationship, but the whole sort of healthcare ecosystem. So there's so that's another whole area of things. And by the way, there's, some of the other things that we're doing, there's a whole NLP and health coaching certification that we do for people looking to upscale what they do. So there's a lot of, I think, really interesting applications.
Absolutely. And if anyone would like to locate that or find out more about the SFM series, is it on the
So that's on the diltsstrategygroup.com, just DILTS strategygroup.com.
Perfect. What we'll do, we record this, we put it on YouTube, and we'll have a list of all the links. I'll email Teresa and
Yes.
get them from Teresa.
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, I know you are.
And we could go on. We could go on forever. I could.
Robert. I've got so many more questions, but we'll leave it for another day.
Maybe we can have another. We can
Absolutely.
have a follow-up.
I appreciate that.
We'd love
I
that.
would
We'd
enjoy it.
appreciate it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Amazing. Well, Robert, thank you very much. If you could stay on for 2 seconds, Kallum and I will see you off. But on behalf of Connect Coaching, Kallum, myself, and our community, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's been definitely a pleasure. Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Bye for now.
Hey guys, Kallum and Conor here from Connect Coaching. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Unplugged Podcast. We're jumping in to let you know about something really exciting. If you are a practitioner, a coach, or a trainer in the alternative therapy modality space, the Forever Client Matrix is something that we've modeled in the last 30 combined years, both Conor and my experience. And we've turned it into a 2-day intensive, and we want to give you a preview of that, the Forever Client Matrix.
Absolutely.
We want to make the bar for them to enter into that program very, very low and have them get incredible results.
I've sold about $40 million worth, and together we've sold about $100 million worth with our teams.
That's right. We believe that trust and reliability is the currency of the future. So if you want to turn every transaction into a transformational experience, if you want to turn every prospect into a forever client, then please click on the link below in the description and get instant access now to your preview of the Forever Client Matrix.
Enjoy.